On November 8th of 1978, a British ship called the Snow Hunter was passing en route to the China Seas. They came across a small island. The captain of the ship, John Fern, saw hundreds of people rushing towards his ship and greeting his sailors. The island was called Nauru. Captain Fern nicknamed it Pleasant Island because of the island's green central plateau, the swaying palms, and the white sandy beaches. Welcome to the Seeker's Edge, where we seek knowledge that'll give you an edge in life. The story of the island is very interesting. The history of Nauru is a true story of rags to riches and back to rags. You see, Nauru was just an ordinary island, a small island nation located on the Pacific Ocean, with a land area of just 21 square kilometers and a population of around 10,000 people. This all changed in 1899, when geologist ELLIS inspected a rock-like object that was propping open a door in the Sydney office of the Pacific Islands Company, a trading and plantation firm. He had been told it was a piece of petrified wood from Nauru, but this didn't seem right to ELLIS, and he would soon discover that it was actually a high-grade phosphate ore, a super fertilizer worth a potential fortune if he could locate the source. Sailing to Nauru in 1901, ELLIS found that 80% of the entire island, the raised central plateau Nauruans called TOPSIDE, was rich in phosphate of lime. The Pacific Islands Company was renamed the Pacific Phosphate Company, and in 1905 a deal was made with Germany to mine Nauru. A year later, the first boatload of Nauruan phosphate would sink to the bottom in a storm off of Australia, but this setback did little to deter miners. And over the next decade, Nauru would export hundreds of thousands of tons of phosphate. The discovery of phosphate quickly became the basis of Nauru's economy. Phosphate mining on Nauru was carried out by foreign companies, starting with the Pacific Phosphate Company, which was jointly owned by Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Mining operations were later taken over by the German-owned Nauru Phosphate Corporation, NPC, in 1906. During World War I, the Australian government seized control of NPC's assets on Nauru and took over the mining operations. The Australian government continued to control Nauru's phosphate resources after the war and established the British Phosphate Commissioners in 1919 to manage the mining and export of phosphate. Before we continue, why is phosphate so damn valuable? Phosphate is a mineral that's primarily composed of phosphorus, go figure, and oxygen. Phosphate is an important ingredient in fertilizer, which is used to increase crop yields and improve the quality of agricultural products. It's also used in a wide variety of industries, like food production, animal feed, pharmaceuticals, and detergents. During the time of discovery, every nation wanted phosphate. Now back to the story. Nauru's phosphate reserves proved to be highly valuable for the global market, with the island exporting around 80 million metric tons of phosphate throughout the 20th century. The economic boom brought on by the mining industry saw the construction of shipping ports, processing facilities, and supporting industries on the island. The phosphate extracted from Nauru was used in a variety of industries, including fertilizers, cosmetics, and animal fodder. One of the few sources of high-grade phosphate, the demand for Nauruan phosphate was high, and the island's mining operations were able to sell their product at a premium price. One of the largest markets for Nauruan phosphate was Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain. These countries were able to purchase the phosphate at subsidized rates, which helped to support their agricultural industries. The mining boom brought a significant amount of wealth to Nauru, and the island became one of the wealthiest nations per capita in the world. However, phosphate mining was a double-edged sword. The intensive phosphate mining on Nauru led to the destruction of the island's natural landscape. The extraction process involves stripping off the topsoil, which contained vegetation, leaving behind an entirely barren landscape. And this process resulted in the severe soil erosion and left the island vulnerable to flooding, as there was no vegetation to hold soil in place. The mining also caused significant damage to the island's coral reefs and marine ecosystem, as the waste from the mining process was dumped into the ocean, polluting the water. The limited land and isolation of Nauru also made it challenging for other industries to develop. The phosphate mining had dominated the economy, and it was the primary source of income for the island. To make matters worse, during World War II, Nauru was invaded by Japan in August of 1942. The Japanese took control of the island, which was important for its phosphate reserves. The Nauruan people were forced into labor camps and suffered horrific conditions, including malnutrition, disease, and mistreatment. Many were also subjected to brutal torture and execution. In addition to the inhumane treatment of the Nauruan people, the Japanese also inflicted significant damage to the island's infrastructure and natural environment. They destroyed many of the facilities used for mining and processing phosphate and They also bombed the island's airstrip and port facilities. As a result of the Japanese invasion and occupation, only about 600 of the Nauruans survived, out of a pre-war population of approximately 1,200. The survivors were mostly women and children who had been evacuated to other Pacific islands before the Japanese arrived. The devastation caused by the Japanese occupation had a long-lasting impact on Nauru, and the country struggled to recover for many years after the war. Yeah, so it took Nauru a while to recover, but they did. The Nauruan phosphate industry was almost immediately revived, and after a few years, exports were higher than ever. Over the next 2 decades, exports would rise steadily, with Australian and New Zealand farmers continuing to pay far below market prices until 1963. By the time Nauru gained independence in 1968, more than 35 million metric tons of phosphate had left its shores. Enough phosphate to fill dump trucks parked end to end from New York City to Los Angeles and back again. Nauru's wealth from phosphate mining made it one of the wealthiest nations per capita in the world during the 1970s and 1980s. In 1975, Nauru's Phosphate Royalties Trust was valued at well over $1 billion, and the country's per capita gross domestic product was second only to Saudi Arabia. Most Nauruans certainly didn't live in luxury, though. But the government didn't tax incomes. They provided free education and healthcare and was the main employer for Nauruans. Immigrants generally worked in mining. The government also brought cruise ships, aircraft, overseas hotels, while politicians were known to charter flights to shop and vacation abroad. Curiously, during this time, sports cars became a prized possession in Nauru, even though driving leisurely around the island takes about 20 minutes. One police chief even imported a Lamborghini, only to discover it was too bulky to squeeze behind the wheel. People would go into a shop, buy a few sweets, pay with a $50 note, and not take the change. They'd use money as toilet paper. Too bad that was all unsustainable, and it didn't really last. The country's dependence on a singular resource led to a significant exploitation and environmental degradation. The Nauruan government claimed their share of the profits, but corruption and mismanagement plagued the country's economic development. The limited land and isolation of Nauru made it difficult for other industries to develop, and the government failed to diversify the economy. As a result, when phosphate reserves began to run out in the 1990s, Nauru's economy it collapsed. There's no better word for it. With the decline of phosphate mining, Nauru's main source of income vanished, leaving the country with few economic opportunities. As a result, the government was forced to make cuts to social welfare programs and other government services. In an effort to generate income, the Nauruan government turned to other industries, including offshore banking and online gambling, but these ventures, they weren't enough to make up for the loss of revenue from phosphate mining. You can't just replace phosphate in tons upon other tons of phosphate. The country's once vast wealth diminished, and the people of Nauru were left with a destroyed natural landscape and a broken economy. Today, Nauru is heavily reliant on foreign aid and is struggling to overcome the legacy of its phosphate mining past. The supply of phosphate is expected to run out soon, and the country faces an uncertain future. Nauru's experience with phosphate mining offers several valuable lessons. The rapid exploitation of natural resources can lead to short-term economic gains, but have long-term negative consequences on the environment that vastly outweigh whatever positives you gained in the short term. They can have negative consequences on the environment, the social fabric, the economy. Nauru's heavy dependence on phosphate mining left its economy vulnerable and unable to adapt to changing market conditions. The depletion of phosphate reserves led to the collapse of the economy. The experience of Nauru highlights the importance of sustainable development and diversification of economies. Developing economies should aim to utilize their natural resources in a way that's sustainable and ensures long-term economic and social benefits. Diversification of economies can reduce vulnerability to external shocks. It can promote growth and increase resilience. It kind of just makes natural, logical sense. If all of your stock is invested in one option and that option flops and turns sideways, you're done. But if you have stock in 2, 3, 4 options and one of them goes sideways, well, you haven't lost quite as much. In conclusion, the story of Nauru's phosphate mining boom and subsequent collapse serve as a cautionary tale for other developing countries. The long-term negative consequences of unsustainable exploitation of natural resources shouldn't be underestimated, and the importance of sustainable development and diversification of economies can't be overstated. I can't think of another way to say it, so I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe to The Seeker's Edge for an edge in life. Until next time.